It usually happens late at night when the world has gone quiet and there is nothing left to distract you. The phone is face down, the room is still. Your body feels heavy, like it has been carrying the day for too long. From the outside, it looks like rest. From the inside, it feels like failure. Somewhere in that silence, a word shows up without being invited. Lazy. Not shouted, not even spoken aloud. It arrives gently, almost politely, as if it has always belonged there. You don't argue with it. You've heard it before, enough times that it sounds familiar, almost true. The strange thing is how calm everything looks while that word settles in. Nothing is falling apart, no crisis is happening, yet inside there is a quiet tightening, a sense that something is wrong with you for being here, unmoving, tired, unfinished. You replay small moments from the day, tasks left undone, plans delayed again. You compare the stillness of the room to the noise in your head. Everyone else seems to be moving forward somewhere. You are here, counting the ceiling, wondering when rest started needing an explanation. The night doesn't accuse you out loud. It simply holds the question and lets you sit with it alone, breathing, listening, waiting, unsure whether the heaviness is a flaw or something you have been carrying for longer than you remember. The answer does not arrive yet, and that uncertainty quietly stays there. When you look back, it rarely begins with one big moment. It starts quietly, with small expectations placed gently on ordinary days. Somewhere along the way, resting stopped feeling neutral. It became something you did only after everything else was done, and somehow everything else was never finished. There were lists that stayed half-checked, ideas that felt alive once, then slowly moved to tomorrow. You told yourself you would get back to them when you had more energy, more clarity, more time. But the days kept asking for effort before they offered space. In those earlier years, tiredness still felt temporary. You believed pushing a little harder would fix it, so you ignored the signs, treating exhaustion like a personal weakness instead of a message. Each pause came with a quiet promise to make up for it later. Over time, rest began to carry a different meaning. Sitting too long felt undeserved. Enjoying stillness came with a background guilt, as if you were borrowing time you hadn't earned. You measured yourself against older dreams and younger versions of you, and always came up short. Now, when you stop, the body feels relieved, but the mind feels behind. The contrast is sharp. What once felt like motivation has turned into pressure. Expectations stayed loud, even as energy faded. Somewhere in that gap, rest was mistaken for failure, and being human slowly became something to apologize for. No one pointed it out directly. It was learned through glances, comparisons, quiet comments, and the way productivity was praised more than presence. Slowly, without noticing, you absorbed the idea that slowing down meant falling behind. By the time you noticed the weight, it already felt like part of who you were, and questioning it felt harder than carrying it every single day. From the outside, these days look empty. Long pauses, quiet rooms, time that seems untouched. If someone were watching, they might think nothing is happening at all, that you are drifting, wasting hours, choosing stillness without reason. But inside there is movement that never stops, thoughts that wake before you do, worries that stay even when you sit down. You carry conversations that never happened, responsibilities that were never written down, expectations that no one officially gave you, yet somehow feel yours to fulfill. There is the effort of holding yourself together, of appearing fine, of answering simple questions with simple words when the truth feels too heavy to explain. Emotional work does not leave marks on the body, but it drains it all the same. By the time the day ends, your muscles are quiet, but your mind feels used. Nothing dramatic happens here, no breakdown, no moment that forces attention, just survival, repeated softly, getting through the day without collapsing, managing feelings without letting them spill, staying present enough to function, distant enough to protect yourself. The contrast is almost invisible. To the world it looks like rest, to you it feels like constant strain held under the surface. Even silence requires effort when it's full of unfinished thoughts. This is the part no one claps for, the unseen weight of staying, of enduring without proof. When the word lazy shows up again, it skips over all of this. It ignores the load you've been carrying quietly, the way you've been balancing yourself just to remain here. Slowly a question begins to form, not loud, not demanding, just a small doubt. What if stillness isn't emptiness? What if nothing happening on the outside is exactly how you manage to keep everything from falling apart inside? That question doesn't answer everything, but it changes the shape of the silence, and the accusation feels slightly less complete than it did before. Somewhere along the way, the days stop having clear edges. Morning and evening feel similar, like pages repeating themselves. You wake up tired, move through familiar motions, and return to the same quiet at night. When you try to remember what you did yesterday, it slips away easily. There is effort in these days, even if it's hard to point at. Small attempts, half starts. You think about changing things, fixing things, becoming lighter somehow. You try in ways that don't look impressive. Thinking counts as effort. Enduring counts too, though it rarely looks like progress. The frustration isn't loud. It hums underneath everything. You wonder how you can be so tired when nothing seems to be happening. You compare hours spent thinking to results that never appear. The mind keeps working, but the world stays the same. From the outside, it still looks like waiting, like delay. Inside, it feels like pushing against something invisible. You are moving, but the ground doesn't shift. Each day requires energy just to begin again, and that energy leaves no visible trace. This is where doubt grows quietly, not dramatic enough to notice, but persistent enough to drain you. You question your pace, your worth, whether effort matters if it leaves no proof behind. Time keeps passing anyway. Days blur together, and exhaustion deepens, not because you did nothing, but because you kept trying in a place where progress refuses to show itself. The tiredness here isn't sudden,
It's accumulated, layered gently over time, until even surviving the day feels like work that no one sees and no one names. It sits with you quietly, asking for energy without offering recognition, slowly teaching you that effort can exist without applause, and that kind of tiredness settles deeper than anyone expects over long nights. There comes a point when the pause arrives without asking permission, not because you decided to stop, but because continuing began to cost more than you had left. The body slows first, the mind follows reluctantly. From the outside, it looks like giving up. Inside, it feels like something stepping in to prevent collapse. A quiet instinct choosing stillness over breaking. The days you stopped pushing were not empty days. They were days where energy was being guarded, even if you didn't have words for it then. Silence often gets misunderstood. It looks passive, unproductive, but silence can be active in its own way. It can be the space where damage is kept from spreading further, where exhaustion is finally allowed to exist without being challenged. You may have judged these pauses harshly, called them delays, weakness, proof that you were falling behind, but the truth sits deeper than that. If you hadn't slowed down, something else might have given way. The pause wasn't an escape, it was a response. There is a difference between quitting and coping, though they look similar from far away. One abandons hope, the other quietly preserves it. In those still moments, you weren't choosing nothing, you were choosing not to disappear. Understanding this doesn't arrive all at once. It settles slowly, like breath returning after being held too long. The self-blame doesn't vanish, but it softens. And in that softer space, the pause begins to feel less like a failure and more like the reason you are still here at all. It was care disguised as stopping, protection mistaken for emptiness, and survival happening quietly where no one thought to look. The voice doesn't disappear just because you understand a little more. It comes back, especially when things are quiet. It sounds familiar, almost reasonable, repeating what you've heard for years. Lazy. If you cared enough, you would do more. If you were stronger, this wouldn't be so hard. That voice didn't start as yours. It was built slowly, from comparisons you never asked for, and standards you didn't choose. You absorbed it from conversations, from praise given to others, from the way effort was valued only when it looked visible. Over time, those sounds settled inside and learned to speak in your own tone. It shows up when you rest, when you hesitate, when progress takes longer than expected. It ignores context. It forgets everything you've been carrying. It reduces your whole experience into one sharp word, because sharp words are easier than complex truths. What's rarely noticed is how tired that voice sounds too, how strained it is from trying to keep you moving at any cost. It mistakes pressure for care and urgency for worth. Slowly, something begins to shift. You start to hear the voice without fully stepping into it. You notice the distance between what it says and what you've actually lived. The contrast becomes clearer. Judgment came from outside. Your reality was built from endurance. The voice may still speak, but it no longer owns the room. It becomes one sound among many, not the final authority. And in that small separation, there is relief, not silence, not victory, just space enough to breathe without immediately believing the accusation every time it appears. That distance matters more than it seems, because even a little room between you and blame can change how heavily each quiet night lands inside your chest during those hours. Something changes here, but it doesn't announce itself. There is no clear moment where everything makes sense. It's quieter than that. An awareness settles in slowly, like realizing you've been holding your breath without noticing. You begin to see what has been carried beneath the surface, regret that stayed longer than it should have, responsibility picked up too early or never put down, the constant effort of surviving situations that asked more than you were ready to give. None of it dramatic enough to explain, all of it heavy enough to feel. There were hopes you postponed, not because you didn't want them, but because you didn't have the space to hold them properly. Dreams paused, not abandoned, emotions set aside so life could keep moving. You learned to be functional before you learned to be gentle with yourself. For a long time, you blamed the weight. You thought it meant something was wrong with you, that if you were better, faster, stronger, the heaviness would disappear. But now the story starts to change shape.
Understanding doesn't excuse everything, and it doesn't erase the past. It simply widens the view. You begin to recognize that carrying this much would have tired anyone. That exhaustion was not proof of failure, but evidence of how long you kept going without rest. This realization doesn't rush in with relief. It arrives carefully. It sits beside you instead of standing over you. Shame doesn't vanish, but it loosens its grip. Compassion enters quietly, not as praise, but as permission to stop punishing yourself for surviving the only way you knew how. In this space, self-blame loses some of its certainty. You may not feel lighter yet, but you feel more truthful. And that honesty, gentle and steady, becomes the beginning of seeing yourself not as broken, but as someone who has been carrying far more than they were ever meant to carry alone. Nothing changes overnight, but the way you look at your tiredness shifts slightly, allowing a softer understanding to exist where harsh certainty once lived inside you now. You can look back now and notice how many moments were misunderstood, times you thought you were doing nothing when in truth you were holding yourself together, staying present enough to get through the day, even when motivation had quietly left the room. Endurance rarely looks impressive. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't leave behind finished projects or clear milestones. Most of the time, it looks like waking up again, like answering messages, like eating something small and calling it enough. The world measures progress by movement, by visible change, by speed, but resilience often moves in place. It holds ground. It keeps things from getting worse when improvement isn't possible yet. There were days when simply staying was the hardest option available. You could have disappeared into numbness or given up entirely. Instead, you remained, quietly, imperfectly. That choice didn't feel brave then, because survival rarely does. When you called yourself lazy, you overlooked this kind of strength. You ignored the effort it took to exist while carrying disappointment, uncertainty, and fatigue. You dismissed endurance because it didn't look like achievement.
Seen clearly now, those pauses were not empty spaces. They were proof that something in you refused to let go completely. Invisible resilience kept you here, even when progress had no shape. This isn't about rewriting the past into something heroic. It's about recognizing what was already there. You didn't stop because you didn't care. You slowed because you were enduring more than anyone could see, and staying required more strength than leaving ever would have been. It lived quietly beneath your routines, unnoticed and unnamed. No applause, no recognition, just persistence. Even now, that same strength is still here, steady and quiet, waiting without demanding proof of its worth or urgency, allowing you to rest inside it. Nothing needs to be solved here. The story pauses, not to end, but to breathe. After carrying so much meaning, the moment asks for softness instead of answers. Urgency loosens its grip, and time stretches quietly. There is space now to sit without explaining yourself, to let thoughts pass without chasing them. The pressure to improve fades into the background, replaced by something gentler. Not relief exactly, but permission. You notice how often your body has been braced, waiting for the next demand, how even rest was once hurried, as if calm had to justify its existence. Here there is no timer, no expectation to turn this quiet into progress. Breathing becomes noticeable again, not as a technique, just as something happening on its own. Each inhale feels less like preparation, more like arrival. Each exhale lets go of a little urgency you didn't realize you were holding. This moment doesn't promise change. It doesn't offer clarity or direction. It simply allows you to be here, unfinished and unjudged, to exist without fixing, without proving, without moving forward or backward. The world outside can wait a little longer. Nothing is being lost by slowing down. In this gentle pause, you are not behind, you are not late, you are simply human, allowed to rest inside a quiet that asks nothing from you and gives nothing back except the rare feeling of being held by stillness itself. It is enough for now to stay present with this softness, letting it surround you briefly, trusting that gentleness does not erase strength, it restores it quietly, without effort, without demand, without needing tomorrow to arrive sooner than it should, for anyone listening tonight. You reach the end without any dramatic shift, no sudden energy, no new plan waiting to be followed, just a quiet understanding that settles where the accusation once lived. The word lazy loses its weight here, not because it was argued with, but because it was finally seen clearly. When you look at your story as a whole, the pattern changes. What once looked like avoidance now looks like protection. What felt like weakness begins to resemble weariness earned over time. The contrast is gentle but real. You were never failing at life. You were responding to it. Self-blame fades slowly. It doesn't vanish, but it softens into something more forgiving. You stop asking why you weren't more, and begin noticing how much you already carried. How often you showed up in quiet ways that never made noise, never demanded recognition. There is relief in naming this, not relief that fixes everything, but relief that allows you to stop fighting yourself. You don't need to convince anyone else. This understanding is private, meant only for you in this moment.
Being human means getting tired. It means slowing down without a clear explanation. It means surviving seasons that don't look productive from the outside. None of that makes you broken. None of it disqualifies you from rest. The night feels different now, not lighter exactly, but kinder. The silence no longer feels like evidence against you. It feels like space you're allowed to occupy. You may wake up tomorrow with the same responsibilities, the same questions, the same pace. This story doesn't erase them, it simply changes how you stand inside them, with less punishment, with less shame. You were never lazy, you were human, moving through life while carrying more than your share, learning endurance before understanding compassion. And even now, as the room stays quiet and the world sleeps, that truth settles beside you, steady and calm, asking nothing from you except to let it stay, to breathe with it for a moment longer, to feel less alone in the heaviness, and to know that being understood, even briefly, can make the long night gentler than it was before, and the silence less heavy to carry forward. Nothing more is required of you here. No resolution, no promise, no change, just this quiet recognition resting with you as the night continues, reminding you softly that existing as you are has always been enough, even in moments when doubt still lingers quietly, without needing to be answered tonight at all.